Hey guys, tonight we're following a man born clutching a blood clot in his fist, supposedly a good omen, who'll die ruling an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the doorstep of Vienna. You're standing on the Mongolian steppe in 1206, watching a 40-something warlord named Temujin get proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler, by a council of chiefs who spent the last 2 decades trying to kill him. The wind smells like horse sweat and fermented mare's milk. Felt tents, jers, ripple across the grassland like a sea of dirty mushrooms. You probably won't survive the next 40 years if you're on the wrong side of this guy's expansion plans, because his descendants will conquer roughly 12 million square miles, a quarter of the planet's inhabited land, in what might be history's most efficient territorial grab. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm curious if you're in Melbourne at dawn or Minnesota at midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're looking at a man who shouldn't have made it this far. Temujin's father was poisoned when the kid was 9. His own clan abandoned his family on the steppe, basically a death sentence, leaving his mother to dig up wild onions and catch fish with her bare hands to keep her children alive. Rivals kidnapped his wife. His blood brother later betrayed him. By every reasonable metric, Temujin should have died forgotten in some unmarked patch of grassland. Another statistic in the brutal churn of Mongol tribal politics. Instead, you're watching him stand before an assembly of formerly independent chiefs, each one now swearing loyalty to a unified Mongol nation that didn't exist a generation ago. Here's the thing nobody tells you about Genghis Khan. He wasn't some mystical barbarian genius. He was pragmatic to the point of being boring. While other steppe warlords clung to aristocratic bloodlines and ancient grudges, Genghis built his power base on a revolutionary idea. Competence matters more than pedigree. You're a brilliant tactician but born to shepherds. Great, you're now commanding 1,000 horsemen. You're a noble who can't organize a supply line. Enjoy herding goats. This meritocratic approach, historians still argue whether it was ideological conviction or pure survival instinct, turned the Mongol army into a machine that recruited talent from everywhere, including defeated enemies. The steppe politics Temujin navigated make modern geopolitics look like a kindergarten playground. You've got dozens of tribes, Merkits, Tatars, Naimans, Karaits, all jockeying for grazing rights, trade routes, and the privilege of not being raided this season. Alliances shift like sand. Your ally today might sell you to your enemy tomorrow for 3 horses and a felt blanket. Temujin played this game by rewriting the rules. Instead of temporary coalitions held together by fear and bribery, he offered something genuinely novel: permanent membership in a larger structure where loyalty got rewarded and betrayal got punished with industrial efficiency. One of his earliest power moves involved the Tatars, the tribe that poisoned his father. When Genghis defeated them around 1202, he didn't just kill the warriors, he measured everyone against the height of a wagon axle and executed every male taller than that line. Cold? Absolutely. Effective? The Tatars stopped being a problem. You're watching the birth of a pattern. Genghis eliminates threats completely or absorbs them entirely. There's no middle ground, no half measures, no romanticized warrior code about honorable combat. Just math. Can you contribute to the empire? Yes. Welcome aboard. No. Enjoy the afterlife. The 1206 assembly where he becomes Genghis Khan isn't some spontaneous celebration. You're witnessing the culmination of 25 years of calculated relationship building, strategic marriages, and tactical violence. He's united the Mongol tribes by proving he's the only one who can guarantee security and prosperity on the steppe. The chiefs proclaiming him universal ruler aren't doing it out of love. They're making a business decision. Genghis has demonstrated he'll share plunder generously with loyal followers and obliterate anyone who opposes him. Simple transaction. Here's a quirky detail that doesn't make it into most textbooks. Genghis was terrified of dogs. Multiple sources mention he'd go out of his way to avoid them, which is hilarious considering this man would later order the destruction of entire civilizations. A Khwarezmian governor kills your merchants. Burn his empire to ash. A dog barks at you. Better take the long way around the camp. We're all human. What you're really watching in 1206 is the weaponization of unity. The Mongols weren't particularly numerous, maybe 1 million people total, which is roughly the population of modern Austin, Texas. They weren't technologically superior. Their bows and horses were standard steppe issue. What Genghis created was organizational superiority. Every other nomadic confederation in history had fallen apart after 1 or 2 generations because nobody could keep the tribes aligned after the charismatic founder died. Genghis built something different. A system of laws, the yasa, a loyalty structure based on units of 10, Arban, Jagun, Mingan, and a shared identity that transcended old tribal grudges. You're also watching the beginning of an intelligence network that would make the CIA jealous. Genghis obsessively collected information about neighboring kingdoms, their military strength, internal politics, economic vulnerabilities, even weather patterns. While his enemies saw a barbarian warlord, he was conducting cost-benefit analyses about which territories were worth conquering and which routes would minimize casualties. Not exactly the image of a mindless horde, is it? The felt tents you're standing among will become mobile command centers for campaigns stretching across continents. That fermented mare's milk, Irag, will fuel armies that cover 70 miles in a day when European knights struggle to manage 20. And that blood clot Temujin supposedly held at birth. Whether it actually happened or not, it's become the founding myth of an empire that will reshape human geography. You're watching pragmatism conquer romance, efficiency defeat tradition, and a minor warlord become the template for continental domination. You're now sitting on a Mongol horse, and your first thought is probably, this thing is way smaller than I expected. You're right. Mongol ponies stand maybe 13 hands high, basically the size of a large dog if dogs were horizontal and judged you constantly. Compared to the massive European destriers that need crane systems to mount, your ride looks like it wandered out of a petting zoo. But here's what that European warhorse can't do. Survive on frozen grass scraped from under snow, gallop 50 miles without water, or carry you for 10 hours straight while you're twisted backwards in the saddle shooting arrows at pursuers. Your little pony is a biological ATV designed by 10,000 years of natural selection on the steppe. The Mongol military advantage starts with simple arithmetic. You own 5 horses minimum, often 10. You're not riding one horse into battle. You're managing a string of them, rotating fresh mounts throughout the day while your enemy's single warhorses foam at the mouth and collapse. When a Mongol army moves, you're watching a ratio of roughly 5 horses per warrior flowing across the landscape like a liquid. Scouts report European commanders seeing Mongol forces and multiplying their estimates by 5 because they count every horse as a rider. Oops. That psychological warfare is accidental, but Genghis isn't going to correct anyone's math. Your composite bow is a masterpiece of engineering that would make modern materials scientists weep. You're holding layers of horn, sinew and wood glued together with fish bladder, wrapped in birch bark, and designed to generate about 160 pounds of draw weight, roughly double what an English longbow manages. The construction process takes a year because each layer needs to cure properly. Historians still argue whether Mongol bows could reliably penetrate plate armor at range, but here's what's not debatable. You can accurately hit targets at 300 yards while galloping full speed, and your quiver holds 60 arrows. Do the math on a 1,000-man unit dumping 60,000 arrows into an enemy formation in under 2 minutes. The shooting technique is called Parthian shot in Western sources, though you're doing it centuries after the Parthians went extinct. You're twisted completely around in your saddle, facing backwards, releasing arrows at targets you just passed at full gallop. Your stirrups, which Mongols either invented or perfected, depending on which archaeologist you ask, make this physically possible. Europeans are still riding without stirrups or using crude versions, which means their cavalrymen need both hands and significant core strength to stay mounted. You're standing in your stirrups, using your legs as shock absorbers, freeing your hands to operate your bow while your horse does the navigation. Here's a quirky detail that doesn't get enough attention. Mongol warriors could milk their horses by opening a vein in the animal's neck and drinking the blood directly. Not as a last resort. This was standard field nutrition. One horse could provide a litre of blood every 10 days without significant harm, giving you liquid protein without slowing the army for hunting or foraging. You're essentially riding your own mobile blood bank. Vegetarians maybe skip this part of the historical record. The mobility you're experiencing isn't just about speed, it's about operational range. You can campaign 1,000 miles from your supply base because you don't have one. Your army feeds itself from hunting, raiding, and those delightful blood cocktails. European armies need baggage trains stretching for miles, packed with grain and salted meat, moving at walking pace. You're watching Mongol cavalry units vanish beyond the horizon, circle behind enemy positions, and reappear where they're least expected, all while the opposition's supply wagons are still stuck in the mud 3 provinces back. The tactical formations you're drilling in make medieval European cavalry look like they're playing freeze tag. Your basic unit, the Arban, is 10 men who've trained together since childhood, know each other's families, and can execute complex maneuvers using nothing but flag signals and whistles. Scale that up. 10 Arbans make a Jagun, 100, 10 Jaguns make a Mingun, 1,000, and 10 Mingon make a Tumen, 10,000. You can split a Tumen into 100 Jaguns, send them in different directions, and have them converge on a target from multiple angles with split-second timing. Genghis is basically running distributed warfare 1,000 years before radio communication. The composite bow itself represents an arms race frozen in amber. Steppe peoples had been refining this design for centuries, each generation tweaking the horn-to-sinew ratio, experimenting with different woods, optimizing the curve. What you're holding is the AK-47 of the 13th century, reliable, devastating, and manufacturable with relatively basic resources. It's also useless in European hands because mastering it requires starting training around age 6. You need to develop specific muscle memory and skeletal structure to handle that draw weight. Adult Europeans picking up Mongol bows is like an amateur grabbing a professional gymnast's equipment, technically possible, immediately humiliating. Your horse is also your reconnaissance system. Mongol ponies can smell water from miles away, detect predators before humans notice anything, and navigate terrain in complete darkness using senses you don't understand. You're riding a 4-legged early warning system that doubles as transportation and occasionally as lunch if things get desperate. The bond between Mongol warrior and horse isn't some romanticized Disney friendship. It's pure utilitarian interdependence. Your horse keeps you alive, you keep it fed and protected. Simple transaction, remember that pattern? Speed gives you strategic choices European commanders can't imagine. You can retreat 100 miles, wait for pursuit to exhaust itself, then turn and destroy the scattered chasers. You can fake retreat so convincingly that enemies chase you into prepared ambush sites and never see it coming. The feigned retreat is the Mongol signature move. Historians count dozens of major battles where European or Chinese forces thought they'd broken the Mongol line, charged forward in celebration, and rode straight into envelopment. You're not running away, you're reloading reality. The terrifying part for your enemies? This isn't exotic technology they can't access. Horses exist everywhere. Bows are basic tools. The Mongol advantage is systematic training, cultural emphasis on mounted archery, and organizational discipline that treats cavalry units like precision instruments instead of noble glory seekers. You're watching military professionalism defeat aristocratic amateurism, and it's not particularly close. You're standing outside the walls of Nishapur in 1221, watching what happens when a city kills Genghis Khan's favorite son-in-law. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for Nishapur. The Mongol response to Tokchar's death isn't just military retaliation, it's a calculated performance designed to send a message across continents. When the city finally falls after a brutal siege, you're witnessing systematic execution. Every single resident, man, woman, child, even the cats and dogs, gets killed. Then, just to make absolutely certain nobody survived in a basement somewhere, the Mongols divert a river over the ruins. The estimated death toll ranges from 1.7 million, probably exaggerated, to several 100,000, still horrifying. But here's the thing, that death toll isn't the point. The point is what the dozen nearby cities do when they hear about it. They surrender immediately, without fighting. Some send delegations to meet the Mongols halfway, offering tribute and guides and anything else that might prevent becoming the next Nishapur. You're watching fear operate as a force multiplier, turning one horrific example into a dozen bloodless conquests. Genghis isn't being randomly cruel. He's running a cost-benefit analysis where maximum brutality in one location creates minimum resistance everywhere else. It's terrorism, as military doctrine, and it works frighteningly well. The Mongol approach to siege warfare has a simple decision tree. Surrender immediately and you'll probably survive with your city intact, maybe even prosper under new management. Resist and eventually surrender. Expect selective executions. Soldiers die, Craftsmen and administrators live. Fight to the bitter end, everyone dies, and will salt the earth for good measure. You're watching psychological warfare that gives targets clear incentives to make smart choices. Most cities, unsurprisingly, make smart choices. Here's a mainstream historical fact that's somehow both obvious and overlooked. The Mongols killed somewhere between 30 and 40 million people during their conquests, roughly 11% of the global population at the time. That's Holocaust-level demographic impact spread across a century of expansion. But, and this is the darkest part, most of those deaths happened specifically because Genghis designed a system where exemplary violence prevented future violence. He'd rather obliterate one city completely if it meant 10 others surrendered peacefully. From a purely mathematical standpoint, it reduced total casualties compared to fighting a conventional war at every location. You're watching utilitarianism taken to its most horrifying logical conclusion. The intelligence network you encountered back in that felt tent camp, it's working overtime, spreading these atrocity stories. Mongol envoys arrive at cities months before the army does, carrying detailed descriptions of what happened at Nishapur, Merv, Baghdad. They're not making idle threats. They're presenting case studies. Resist and die, or surrender and live. Here's photographic evidence. Except instead of photographs, it's survivors who escaped with stories so traumatic they spread like wildfire through trade routes and merchant networks. Historians still argue whether the Mongol reputation for brutality was deserved, or largely propaganda amplified by terrified chroniclers. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Yes, they absolutely committed large-scale massacres, but the numbers in contemporary accounts, 1.6 million dead at Herat, 2 million at Baghdad, are almost certainly inflated, sometimes by people who never visited the cities in question. Medieval chroniclers loved round numbers and apocalyptic language. That said, even if you cut the death tolls in half, you're still looking at industrial-scale killing. Here's your quirky detail. The Mongols sometimes built pyramids from the skulls of their victims, not as religious monuments or permanent structures, just temporary psychological installations designed to greet the next city on the campaign route. You're a defender watching Mongol scouts arrive with detailed sketches of a skull pyramid from the town 50 miles west, maybe including a helpful note identifying the skulls as belonging to the garrison that resisted for 3 weeks. What's your next move? Exactly. You open the gates and offer the Mongols anything they want. The siege of Merv in 1221 illustrates this system perfectly. The city's governor refuses surrender terms, confident in his massive walls and garrison. Bad call. When the Mongols finally breach the defences, they divide the population among their soldiers. Each warrior gets responsibility for executing between 300 and 400 people. It takes days. The math alone is staggering. If you've got a 20,000-man army and each soldier kills 300 people, that's 6 million corpses, which is obviously impossible given Merv's actual population, proving the chroniclers were exaggerating. But the core fact remains. Merv resisted, Merv died, and every city east and west of Merv learned a valuable lesson. The brilliance, if you can call systematic terror brilliant, is that Genghis makes surrender attractive. You're not just avoiding death, you're potentially gaining benefits. Cities that surrender early sometimes get tax breaks, protection from other raiders, and integration into Mongol trade networks. The Silk Road becomes safer under Mongol control than it's been in centuries because the Mongols execute bandits with the same efficiency they execute resistant cities. Merchants love stability, even if it comes from ruthless conquerors. Remember those composite bows from earlier? They're also psychological weapons. Mongol archers can stand outside your walls beyond your crossbow's effective range and drop arrows into your city all day. You're watching them casually shoot your defenders while eating lunch, laughing, completely untouchable. That kind of technological superiority breeds despair faster than any siege tower. The European encounter with Mongol terror tactics produces some darkly comic moments. When Mongol forces reach Hungary and Poland in 1241, Christian chroniclers describe them as literal demons, punishment from God, the apocalypse made flesh. The reality, organized military units using proven psychological warfare, is somehow scarier than demons. Demons you can pray away. This requires actual strategic thinking. You're standing in a city council meeting somewhere in Persia, circa 1220. The Mongols are 3 months away. You've heard the stories. A merchant just arrived with eyewitness accounts from 2 destroyed cities. Your choice. Fight and maybe survive if you win, but definitely die horribly if you lose. Or surrender, keep your life, probably keep your property, and simply pay taxes to new management. The mathematics aren't subtle. You open the gates. Terror as a weapon isn't Mongol innovation. Everyone from Assyrians to Romans used it. But Genghis systematized it, made it predictable, and paired it with genuine incentives for cooperation. You're watching violence become a language with clear grammar and syntax. You're dressed as a merchant, which is convenient because you actually are one, sort of. You're traveling the Silk Road 2 years before the Mongol army arrives, selling felt rugs and Chinese silk, making notes about fortress wall thickness, garrison rotation schedules, and which local princes hate each other. Welcome to Genghis Khan's intelligence service, where the line between legitimate trade and military reconnaissance is pleasantly blurry. The Mongols don't invade blindly. That's for amateurs and European crusaders. You're part of a network that spends months, sometimes years, mapping every relevant detail about target territories before a single arrow gets knocked. The Silk Road is Genghis's gift to intelligence gathering. You've got merchants traveling from China to Persia, from India to Russia, all carrying goods and gossip in equal measure. The Mongols don't create this network, they weaponize it. Genghis offers merchant caravans military protection, tax breaks, and safe passage through Mongol territory. In exchange, those merchants casually mention things like, the northern gate at Samarkand has hinges that squeak, or the emir's brother is furious about inheritance disputes. You're watching commercial infrastructure become an espionage apparatus, and most participants don't even realize they're spies. Your assignment is mapping water sources, which sounds boring until you remember armies die of thirst faster than they die in battle. You're noting every well, spring, river ford, and seasonal stream within 200 miles of your target city. When the Mongol cavalry arrives in 3 years, they'll know exactly where to water those 5 horses per warrior. Remember that multiplication problem from earlier, without asking locals or wasting time searching. European armies regularly lose entire campaigns because they can't find water. You're ensuring that never happens to the Mongols. Here's a mainstream historical fact that demonstrates this intelligence obsession. Before invading the Khwarezmian Empire, Mongol scouts spent 4 years gathering information about its internal politics, military strength, and geography. They knew about the rivalry between Shah Muhammad and his mother, the Queen Mother. They mapped every major fortress. They counted garrison sizes. They identified which provincial governors were corrupt or incompetent. When the invasion finally started in 1219, Genghis wasn't improvising. He was executing a plan based on thousands of intelligence reports. You're also collecting political intelligence, which is messier but equally valuable. That emir's brother who's angry about inheritance, he might be willing to open a city gate in exchange for Mongol support. That garrison commander who hasn't been paid in 6 months, maybe he'd prefer new management. The Mongols don't just conquer territory, they identify internal fractures and drive wedges into them. You're watching regime change operations centuries before the CIA makes them fashionable. The sophistication of Mongol reconnaissance would impress modern intelligence agencies. You're not just gathering information, you're verifying it through multiple sources. A merchant reports that City X has weak walls. Send a second merchant to confirm. A deserter claims the garrison is undermanned. Cross-reference with observations from traders who passed through. Historians still argue whether the Mongols had a formal intelligence bureau, or if this network emerged organically from military necessity, but the results speak for themselves. The Mongols rarely got surprised. Here's your quirky detail. Mongol scouts sometimes posed as refugees fleeing Mongol advances. You're standing at a city gate covered in road dust telling horrified guards about atrocities you personally witnessed. Atrocities your own army committed. The guards let you in, feed you, ask for detailed descriptions of Mongol tactics and numbers. You provide completely accurate information because it's all terrifying anyway, and while you're eating their bread, you're counting their weapons, noting shift changes, and identifying which sections of wall need repair. It's psychological warfare and intelligence gathering in one package. The mapping extends to terrain analysis that would make military cartographers jealous. You're noting elevation changes, forest density, swamp locations, areas where cavalry can maneuver versus where they'd bog down. When the Mongol army arrives, their generals have mental maps so detailed they can plan 3-dimensional tactical movements without ever having visited the battlefield. That feigned retreat tactic mentioned earlier, it only works if you know exactly where to retreat to, which hidden valleys can hide your forces, which river crossings can handle a sudden reversal. Economic intelligence matters as much as military intelligence. You're documenting trade routes, tax collection methods, which cities are wealthy versus which are struggling. Rich cities have more to lose and surrender faster when threatened. Poor cities might resist out of desperation. The Mongols adjust their approach based on economic data, offering generous terms to wealthy commercial centres, while showing no mercy to impoverished fortresses with nothing to trade except defiance. Religious and cultural intelligence gets collected too. You're noting which cities are Sunni versus Shia, Christian versus Buddhist, because religious tensions create exploitable divisions. The Mongols might promise religious freedom to one sect in exchange for cooperation against their sectarian rivals. You're watching the same divide-and-conquer tactics that colonial powers will use centuries later, just with felt tents instead of pith helmets. The network even includes technical specialists. You're travelling with a guy who knows siege engineering, casually examining city fortifications while pretending to admire architecture. He's calculating angles for trebuchets, identifying weak points in foundations, noting whether walls are solid stone or rubble filled with a stone facing. When Mongol siege engineers arrive later, more on them next section, they'll have specifications accurate enough to pre-build equipment before reaching the target. Communication security is hilariously primitive by modern standards, but effective for the era. You're carrying information in your head, not writing anything down that could be intercepted. The Mongol military uses a simple substitution cipher for written messages, which any modern cryptographer could crack in minutes, but which confuses 13th century enemies just fine. Sometimes the best security is that nobody expects illiterate nomads to have written communications at all. The timeline is what makes this intelligence gathering truly impressive. You're part of operations that begin half a decade before invasion. Genghis isn't impulsive, he's patient to the point of being methodical. While his enemies assume he's a barbarian who'll charge their walls tomorrow, you're compiling reports that won't be used until next decade. That patience, combined with comprehensive intelligence, means Mongol invasions rarely fail due to poor planning. You're standing in a market square somewhere in Central Asia, haggling over silk prices, and simultaneously conducting military reconnaissance that will help conquer an empire. You're standing outside a Chinese fortress in 1211, and you've got a problem. You can shoot arrows all day, gallop circles around the walls, even cut off supply lines, but that stone barrier isn't moving. Your composite bow, remember that beautiful piece of engineering, is completely useless against 40 feet of rammed earth and brick. Welcome to the one thing Mongols genuinely couldn't do when they started conquering: crack fortified cities. Nomads who spent their lives in felt tents had exactly zero experience with siege warfare. So Genghis did what any pragmatic conqueror would do: he outsourced. The first Chinese engineers joined the Mongol army involuntarily, which is a polite way of saying surrender or die. But if you surrender and you're useful, congratulations on your new job. You're watching Mongol commanders identify skilled craftsmen during city occupations, pulling siege engineers, blacksmiths, and military architects out of prisoner columns, like recruiters at a job fair. Except instead of offering dental benefits, they're offering continued existence. Most engineers take the deal. These Chinese specialists bring technologies that make Mongol commanders literally salivate with anticipation. Counterweight trebuchets, massive siege engines that can hurl 300-pound rocks at walls with enough force to crumble stone, become standard Mongol equipment within a decade. You're assembling one right now from prefabricated parts that travelled with the army in wagons. The irony is delicious. Nomads famous for travelling light are now hauling siege equipment across continents. But it's that same practical flexibility that makes them dangerous. They recognise their weakness in siege warfare and immediately fix it by stealing expertise. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Mongols used gunpowder weapons in their Western campaigns, making them possibly the first army to deploy explosive devices in European warfare. They're launching primitive bombs, ceramic pots filled with gunpowder and shrapnel, over fortress walls using those Chinese trebuchets. The psychological impact is magnificent. You're a defender who's never encountered explosives, and suddenly there's thunder and fire materializing inside your supposedly safe walls, spraying metal fragments in all directions. Half your garrison thinks it's divine punishment, The other half is too busy dying to have opinions. The siege of Zhongdu, modern Beijing in 1215, demonstrates this learning curve perfectly. Early in the campaign, Mongol forces struggle for months against the city's sophisticated defences. By the end, they're using captured Chinese engineers to construct siege towers, trebuchets, and undermining tunnels that would make Roman military engineers proud. The city falls not through Mongol innovation, but through Mongol willingness to adopt anyone else's innovation. You're watching cultural humility disguised as ruthless pragmatism. Persian engineers join the team a few years later, bringing different expertise. While Chinese specialists excel at explosive weapons and mechanical siege engines, Persian engineers are masters of hydraulics and mathematics. You're now part of a multinational engineering corps that includes Chinese bombardiers, Persian mathematicians, and Mongol cavalry officers who coordinate these specialists like a particularly violent orchestra. Historians still argue whether this technological transfer accelerated European military development or if Europeans would have discovered these techniques independently, but there's no debate about the immediate impact. Cities that thought themselves impregnable start falling like dominoes. Here's your quirky detail that deserves more attention. Mongol siege engineers sometimes diverted entire rivers to flood cities or cut off water supplies. At the siege of Baghdad in 1258, you're watching Mongol forces dam the Tigris, lower water levels to expose weak points in river-facing walls, then breach those sections with specialized equipment. It's civil engineering as warfare, and it requires mathematical precision these supposedly illiterate barbarians absolutely should not possess. Except they do, because they hired the people who possess it. The recruitment process becomes institutionalized. You're part of a system where every conquered city gets surveyed for technical talent. Stoneworkers, carpenters, metalworkers, anyone with specialized skills gets marked for potential military service. Some historians compare it to modern military draft systems, except with less paperwork and more immediate consequences for refusing. The Mongol Empire becomes an equal opportunity employer in the darkest possible sense. They don't care about your ethnicity, religion, or background as long as you're useful. The Siege of Örtöö in 1219 showcases this combined expertise. You're operating a Chinese-designed trebuchet, loading it with Persian-calculated trajectories, while Mongol cavalry creates diversions that allow sappers to approach the walls. The siege lasts 5 months, which is actually fast considering Örtöö's formidable defences. The governor who killed those Mongol merchants, remember that intelligence network from the last section, gets executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. The engineers who helped crack his city get bonuses and assignments to the next siege. The technology transfer goes both ways occasionally. Chinese engineers learn Mongol logistical efficiency, how to move massive armies without permanent supply lines. Persian mathematicians absorb Chinese gunpowder chemistry. You're standing at an impromptu engineering conference in Central Asia, where technical knowledge flows in multiple directions, all united by the goal of breaking things more effectively. It's the 13th century's most productive collaborative workspace, assuming you measure productivity in destroyed fortifications. Mongol adaptation speed is genuinely impressive. In 1211, they're struggling with basic fortified towns. By 1220, they're conducting complex sieges involving multiple engineering disciplines, coordinated assaults from different directions, and psychological warfare that weakens defenders before the first stone flies. That's a 9-year learning curve from, we have no idea how to do this, to we're better at this than civilizations that invented it. The mobile siege workshops you're traveling with represent another innovation. Instead of finding craftsmen in every new territory, the Mongols carry their own engineering corps, complete with tools, raw materials, and technical libraries, such as they are in an era of limited literacy. You're essentially part of a traveling death technology startup, constantly iterating on design improvements based on field results. European castles eventually adopt counter-Mongol defensive features after hearing horror stories from the east. Thicker walls, multiple defensive rings, elimination of blind spots. You're watching an arms race where fortress design evolves specifically to counter Mongol siege tactics, which then forces Mongol engineers to develop new techniques, which inspires new defensive innovations. It's evolution through mutual attempted destruction. You're born a shepherd in some forgotten corner of Mongolia, and your career prospects are basically shepherd until you die, probably from exposure or a wolf attack. Then the Mongol army rolls through, and suddenly you've got a different option. Can you organize a supply line? Congratulations, You're logistics officer for a 1,000-man unit. Can you read and write? Welcome to the administrative corps, regardless of whether your father was a nobleman or literally shoveled horse manure for a living. You're experiencing social mobility at speeds that won't be matched until the French Revolution, except with more horseblood and fewer guillotines. Genghis Khan's meritocratic system isn't motivated by progressive ideals. Let's be clear about that. He doesn't care about social justice. He cares about winning. Aristocratic armies waste talent by giving command positions to whoever has the fanciest bloodline, which means you get incompetent nobles leading capable soldiers into stupid disasters. Genghis looks at that system and thinks, why would I handicap myself like that? So he builds something different, a hierarchy where competence is the only currency that matters. Your grandfather was a great Khan. Cool, prove you inherited his skills or enjoy commanding sheep instead of armies. The decimal organization system, remember those Arbans, Jaguns and Mingan from earlier, reinforces this meritocracy. Every commander, from the head of 10 warriors up to the leader of 10,000, gets promoted based on performance. You're evaluated constantly, not on abstract nobility metrics, but on concrete results. Did your unit win battles? Did you minimize casualties? Can you keep your soldiers fed and equipped? Fail at these basics and you're demoted regardless of whose grandson you are. Excel and you're promoted regardless of whose grandson you aren't. Here's a mainstream historical fact that illustrates this principle perfectly. Subutai, arguably the most brilliant military commander in Mongol history, was born to blacksmiths. Not noble blacksmiths, just regular blacksmiths who made horseshoes and arrowheads. Under traditional steppe hierarchy, Subutai would have spent his life making horseshoes and arrowheads. Under Genghis's system, he becomes the guy who conquers 32 nations and wins 65 battles, commanding campaigns from China to Hungary. You're watching what happens when talent isn't locked behind artificial barriers. The promotion speed is wild by medieval standards. You're 22 years old, you've demonstrated tactical brilliance in 3 battles, and suddenly you're commanding a Mingan. 1,000 warriors, many of them twice your age. In European armies, you'd need decades of service and the right family connections to reach equivalent rank. In the Mongol system, Genghis literally doesn't care if you're 22 or 62 as long as you win. Age equals wisdom is one of those traditional assumptions he's perfectly happy to ignore when evidence suggests otherwise. Historians still argue whether Genghis's meritocracy was truly egalitarian or if it just expanded the definition of nobility to include talented commoners while still excluding certain groups. The truth probably lands somewhere in the middle. Women, for example, could wield significant power. Genghis's daughters governed conquered territories, but weren't leading cavalry charges. Slaves could earn freedom and rise through ranks, but started with massive disadvantages. It's less, everyone has equal opportunity, and more, we're willing to recruit talent from previously excluded groups because we're not stupid. Here's your quirky detail. Genghis established a practice where soldiers could bring grievances directly to him, bypassing their commanders. You're a low-ranking cavalry archer who thinks your Jagun commander is incompetent. You can literally walk up to the Khan during his evening audiences and make your case. If you're right and can prove it, the commander gets replaced. If you're wrong or lying, you get executed for wasting the Khan's time. High stakes, but it creates accountability that prevents nobles from abusing soldiers with impunity. It's like an HR department, except the penalty for filing false reports is death. The system creates fierce loyalty because soldiers know their advancement depends on actual merit, not court politics. You're watching warriors who would gladly die for their commanders because those commanders earned their positions through proven capability. Contrast this with European feudal armies, where peasant levies resent noble officers who inherited command through birth, not talent. Mongol army cohesion is built on mutual respect for demonstrated competence, which turns out to be more durable than hereditary obligation. Conquered populations get folded into this meritocracy too, which is genuinely unusual for the era. You're a Chinese general who just lost to the Mongols? If you're genuinely skilled, they'll offer you command positions in the Mongol army, sometimes leading the invasion of your own former allies. The Mongols see no contradiction here. Your previous allegiance means nothing compared to your current usefulness. It's ruthlessly practical and deeply weird by medieval honor code standards, where switching sides made you permanently untrustworthy. Mongol philosophy. Everyone's untrustworthy, but useful people get better supervision. The literacy advantage illustrates this meritocracy in action. Most Mongols are illiterate when the empire starts expanding, which creates obvious administrative problems when you're suddenly governing territories with complex tax systems and legal codes. Solution? Recruit literate administrators from conquered populations, Chinese bureaucrats, Persian scholars, even captured European clerks, and give them real power. You're a Giga scribe who can read and write 5 languages. Congratulations, you're now drafting imperial correspondence and making policy recommendations that affect millions of people. The religious tolerance policies, more on those next section, emerge partly from this meritocratic logic. Discriminating based on religion eliminates potential talent pools, which is inefficient. Better to recruit the best siege engineers regardless of whether they worship Buddha, Allah, Christ, or shamanic spirits. You're watching pragmatism override religious prejudice, not from moral enlightenment, but from cold calculation about resource optimization. Genghis himself embodies the system's values. He's not from the highest Mongol nobility. He's from a mid-tier clan that fell on hard times. His rise to power came through capability, alliances, and ruthless elimination of rivals, not inherited position. When he builds a meritocracy, he's essentially institutionalizing his own biography, creating a system where people like him can rise instead of getting crushed by entrenched aristocracies. The speed of Mongol conquest owes much to this talent recruitment. While enemies waste resources defending rigid social hierarchies, you're absorbing the best people from every conquered territory and deploying them immediately. That Chinese engineer who designed trebuchets for the Song dynasty last year, he's improving Mongol siege equipment this year. That Persian administrator who managed tax collection for the Khwarezmian Empire, he's now optimizing Mongol revenue systems. You're standing in a command tent and nobody cares that the cavalry commander to your left is Mongol nobility. The siege engineer beside him is a former Chinese prisoner, and you're a recently promoted shepherd's son. What matters is the map on the table and who has the best plan for taking that fortress. You're a Nestorian Christian priest in Central Asia, and Mongol cavalry just occupied your city. You're bracing for forced conversion or execution, because that's what normally happens when conquerors arrive. New management typically means new mandatory religion. Except the Mongol commander walks past your church, nods politely, and exempts you from taxation. Wait, what? You're experiencing one of history's most cynical applications of religious tolerance. The Mongols don't care what you worship as long as you don't rebel. Your god, their gods, no gods. It's all the same to them, and that indifference becomes a weapon more effective than forced conversion could ever be. Genghis Khan's religious policy is beautifully simple. All religions are legal, all priests are tax exempt, and anyone who tries to claim their faith is superior gets executed. You're watching enforced pluralism backed by extreme violence, which is somehow both tolerant and terrifying. The tax exemption isn't generosity, it's pragmatic calculation. Priests are influential. They communicate across territories through religious networks, and keeping them happy costs less than fighting religious insurgencies. So Buddhist monks, Christian clergy, Muslim imams and shamanistic practitioners all get the same deal. Pray for whoever you want. Don't cause trouble. Enjoy your tax benefits. The strategic brilliance reveals itself when you consider the alternative. If Mongols forced conversion to their shamanistic traditions, every conquered territory would have a ready-made resistance identity. Defend your faith against pagan invaders. You'd get Christian crusades, Muslim jihads, Buddhist uprisings, all unified by religious opposition to Mongol rule. Instead, Genghis fragments potential resistance by removing religion as a common cause. How do you organize a religious war against conquerors who enthusiastically protect your religion? The cognitive dissonance is deliberate. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Genghis Khan's mother was a Christian, his favorite wife was a Christian, and several of his grandsons converted to Islam, Buddhism, or Christianity, depending on which territories they governed. The ruling family itself embodied religious diversity, which sent powerful signals to conquered populations. You're watching imperial leadership that treats religion as cultural software you can run on the same hardware, useful for administration, irrelevant for identity. The Mongol attitude toward competing truth claims is almost modern in its skepticism. When religious leaders from different faiths debate in front of Mongol officials, and these debates happened regularly, the Mongol response is usually, interesting discussion. All of you can keep believing whatever you want. You're a Buddhist monk arguing that your path to enlightenment is superior to Islamic submission to Allah, and the Mongol judge's verdict is sure, both seem fine, next case please. It's religious relativism, enforced at sword point. Historians still argue whether Mongol tolerance was genuine philosophical conviction or purely strategic calculation. The evidence suggests mostly the latter. When Genghis exempts priests from taxes, he's not making a statement about religious freedom as a human right. He's preventing tax collection from becoming a religious flashpoint. When he allows Muslims to continue Sharia law in their communities, he's not celebrating legal pluralism. He's avoiding the administrative nightmare of imposing Mongol customary law on populations who wouldn't understand it. Here's your quirky detail that demonstrates the policy's flexibility. When Mongol forces conquered Baghdad in 1258, they destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate but carefully preserved Christian and Jewish communities. The caliph got executed, wrapped in carpet and trampled by horses, supposedly because Mongols believed spilling royal blood directly brought bad luck. But the Nestorian Christians threw a celebration. You're watching religious minorities use Mongol conquest as liberation from Muslim rule, which fragments resistance even further. The conquered population can't unite against invaders when half of them think the invasion improved their situation. The practical implementation gets messy sometimes. You're a local Mongol administrator trying to manage a city where Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and Zoroastrians all have competing legal claims based on religious law. The Mongol solution. Each community governs itself according to its own religious law for internal matters, but everyone follows Mongol law for interactions between communities. It's legal pluralism born from administrative pragmatism, not enlightened multiculturalism. Does it work? Mostly. Is it elegant? Not remotely. The tax exemption for clergy creates its own problems. You're a clever merchant who realizes that claiming to be a monk exempts you from taxes. Suddenly everyone's wearing robes and claiming religious devotion. The Mongols respond by requiring religious leaders to register with authorities and prove their credentials, creating one of history's early bureaucratic systems for certifying clergy. It's accidentally progressive. You're standardizing religious institutions across an empire, which helps administrative control while maintaining the appearance of tolerance. Religious sites get special protection under Mongol law, which sounds magnanimous until you realize it's strategic buffer building. That Christian monastery you're standing in? It's also a rest station for Mongol messengers, a diplomatic meeting point for negotiations with European kingdoms, and an intelligence-gathering node where monks report on local sentiment. The Mongols protect your monastery because it serves their interests, not from abstract respect for sacred space. The policy adapts regionally based on what's useful. In China, the Mongols eventually favor Tibetan Buddhism because it provides ideological justification for their rule, the whole universal emperor protecting Dharma narrative. In Persia, they eventually convert to Islam because it eases administration of a majority Muslim population. In Russia, they protect the Orthodox Church because it keeps the population docile. You're watching religious tolerance as a flexible tool, not a fixed principle. The diversity creates strange alliances. You're a Catholic priest from Italy, traveling through Mongol territory on a papal diplomatic mission, and your primary contacts are Nestorian Christians, Buddhists, and shamanistic Mongols, all cooperating smoothly because the empire's tolerance policies make interfaith collaboration the path of least resistance. It's cosmopolitanism built on mutual self-interest rather than ideological commitment to diversity. The psychological impact on resistance movements is devastating. How do you frame rebellion as righteous religious war when the supposed oppressors protect your temples and exempt your priests from taxes? How do you unite Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists against a common enemy when that enemy treats all three faiths identically? The Mongols aren't defeating religious identity. They're making it irrelevant to political power, which fragments opposition more effectively than persecution ever could. You're kneeling in your church, praying to your God, paying no taxes, and completely unable to organize religious resistance against your Mongol overlords because they've removed every traditional justification for faith-based rebellion. It's tolerance weaponized into compliance, and it's disgustingly effective. You're a Mongol messenger, and you've just ridden 70 miles in a single day, which would kill a normal person and their horse. But you're not on a normal horse. You're on your 5th horse of the day, because waiting at relay stations every 15 to 25 miles are fresh mounts, food, and replacement riders if you're too exhausted to continue. Welcome to the YAM system. possibly the most sophisticated communications network before the telegraph, and definitely the reason Mongol armies separated by 1,000 miles can coordinate attacks with timing precision that shouldn't be possible in the 13th century. The infrastructure is staggering. You're part of a network that, at its peak, includes roughly 10,000 stations stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe. Each station, called a yam, stocks fresh horses, supplies, and personnel whose only job is keeping messengers moving. The stations are spaced based on terrain, closer together in mountains where travel is slow, farther apart on flat grasslands where you can gallop for hours. Historians still argue about the exact number of stations because administrative records are incomplete, but even conservative estimates put it around 6,000, which is still enough to make the Roman cursus publicus look like a neighborhood mail route. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Messages could travel up to 200 miles per day using the yam system, meaning orders could cross from Beijing to the Caspian Sea, roughly 4,000 miles, in about 3 weeks. Compare this to European royal messengers, who averaged maybe 40 miles per day on good roads, and you understand why Mongol military coordination seemed almost supernatural to enemies. You're watching information move at speeds that won't be matched until railroads arrive 6 centuries later. The messenger priority system is beautifully brutal. You're carrying a tablet, a paisa, that indicates your message's importance. Gold paisa means emperor's orders, move aside or die. Silver paisa means urgent military communications, very important, still potentially lethal if delayed. Bronze or wood paisa means routine administrative stuff. You'll get fresh horses, but nobody's clearing the road for you. The system creates clear hierarchies where everyone knows immediately whether to help you or get out of your way. The physical demands are absurd. You're expected to ride continuously, sleeping in the saddle if necessary, eating dried meat and mare's milk while galloping. Station masters face execution if they delay imperial messengers, which creates powerful incentives for efficiency. You arrive at a yam, shout your destination and Pisa level, grab fresh supplies, and you're gone in under 5 minutes. It's like a pit stop at a Formula One race, except instead of changing tyres, they're swapping your entire exhausted horse for a rested one. Here's your quirky detail that deserves more attention. The yam system required approximately 300,000 horses in constant rotation. 300,000. That's more horses than most medieval kingdoms could field for entire armies, and the Mongols dedicated them exclusively to mail delivery. The logistical infrastructure to feed, breed, and maintain that many postal horses rivals the complexity of military campaigns. You're watching an empire that treats fast communication as seriously as it treats cavalry charges. Remember those 5 horses per warrior, because information is a weapon as valuable as composite bows. The strategic advantages are obvious once you think about it. Genghis can order an army in Hungary to coordinate with forces in Persia for a simultaneous attack on European kingdoms and Abbasid territories. The timing works because orders travel faster than armies, allowing central command to orchestrate movements across continents. European enemies literally cannot comprehend how Mongol forces separated by mountain ranges attack simultaneously. It looks like sorcery because their own communications take months to cross similar distances. The yam also enables sophisticated logistics management. You're a commander in Central Asia, running low on arrows. You send a message back to production centers in Mongolia, requesting specific quantities delivered to specific locations by specific dates. 3 weeks later, those supplies arrive exactly where needed because the communication network allowed advanced planning. European armies regularly collapse from supply failures. Mongol armies rarely do because they can coordinate logistics in real time, 13th century real time, which is still impressively fast. The system doubles as intelligence gathering. Messengers traveling constantly across the empire pick up information, gossip, rumors, all that valuable social intelligence you learned about in Section 4. Station masters report unusual troop movements, merchant complaints about corrupt officials, anything that might interest central authorities. You're watching a communication network that's simultaneously mail service, intelligence apparatus, and early warning system for rebellions or invasions. The technology is deliberately low-tech, which makes it robust. No complex machinery to break down, no reliance on literacy beyond basic route knowledge. You can be completely illiterate and still function as a yam messenger. Just memorize your route, recognize the paisa symbols, and ride fast. This simplicity means the system works across culturally diverse territories without requiring universal education or technological sophistication. The economic implications are enormous. Merchants using the yam, which they can for a fee, can communicate with business partners across continents, negotiate deals, transfer funds, and coordinate shipments faster than ever before. Remember that weaponized Silk Road from the intelligence section. The yam makes it more profitable and therefore more useful. Faster communication enables more complex trade networks, which generates more tax revenue for the empire, which funds more yam stations, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. The weather resistance deserves respect. You're riding through Mongolian winter where temperatures drop to -40, or across Persian deserts where summer heat cooks the landscape. The yam operates year-round because messages don't stop for weather. Station masters in Siberia maintain horse stocks through brutal winters. Stations in the Gobi Desert stockpile water and provide shade. It's communications infrastructure designed to function under conditions that would shut down most medieval systems entirely. The European discovery of the yam system produces genuine shock. When Marco Polo describes it decades later, European readers think he's exaggerating or lying because nothing in their experience suggests such infrastructure is possible. The idea that Asian barbarians built a postal network superior to anything in Europe challenges fundamental assumptions about civilization and progress. Some historians think Polo's descriptions of the yam inspired later European postal reforms, though proving direct influence is difficult. You're standing at a yam station, watching a messenger arrive from the west, grab fresh horses, and disappear east in under 5 minutes, carrying orders that will coordinate armies 1,000 miles apart. The Empire's nervous system is functioning perfectly. You're a general who just lost a major battle to the Mongols, and you're expecting execution or at best enslavement. Instead, a Mongol commander offers you a job, not as a prisoner or servant, as a military officer commanding troops in the next campaign. Your first reaction is probably, this is a trap, but it's not. The Mongols genuinely believe that someone skilled enough to give them a hard fight is skilled enough to win fights for them. You're experiencing the most aggressive talent acquisition program in medieval history, where yesterday's enemies become tomorrow's strategic assets if they're useful enough. The absorption process starts immediately after conquest. You're part of a systematic survey where Mongol administrators identify everyone with valuable skills: military officers, engineers, craftsmen, scholars, administrators, get marked as talented, and you're getting relocated to wherever the Empire needs you, which might be 3,000 miles away. Refuse, and you're getting relocated to a mass grave, which is considerably closer. Most people choose option 1. The Mongols aren't sentimental about this. They're sorting human resources like farmers sorting grain, keeping the useful parts and discarding the rest. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Mongols relocated entire populations of artisans and skilled workers to build and maintain their new capitals. When Karakorum gets established as the Mongol capital, you're watching Chinese architects, Persian metalworkers, Russian goldsmiths, and European craftsmen all working side by side on construction projects. It's like a medieval trade show, except attendance is mandatory, and the penalty for poor workmanship is death. The city becomes a showcase of absorbed talent from across the conquered territories. The military integration is particularly aggressive. You're that defeated general, and after proving your loyalty, usually by leading Mongol forces against your former allies, which is a neat test of commitment, you might command significant formations. The Mongols identify capable commanders from every conquered army and fold them into the system. Chinese generals who understand siege warfare, Persian officers who know desert tactics, Russian boyars familiar with forest combat, all get deployed where their expertise is most valuable. Historians still argue whether these absorbed commanders were genuinely trusted or constantly watched for betrayal. The answer is probably both. You're given real authority because the Mongols need your skills, but you're also surrounded by Mongol officers who will execute you at the first sign of disloyalty. It's trust backed by surveillance, delegation wrapped in suspicion. Does it work? Well, the empire keeps expanding, so apparently yes. Here's your quirky detail. The Mongols sometimes relocated entire cities, not just the people, but the actual urban infrastructure. When they decided they needed a commercial center in a specific location, they'd forcibly move merchants, craftsmen, and their families from conquered cities, basically copy-pasting urban populations across the map. You're a potter from Samarkand, and suddenly you're doing identical work in Mongolia because some administrator decided the empire needed pottery production closer to the capital. Your skills haven't changed, just your latitude and longitude. The artisan relocations serve multiple purposes. Obviously, the empire needs skilled craftsmen. Someone has to make those composite bows, maintain siege engines, and produce luxury goods for trade. But relocations also break up potential resistance networks. You're a skilled metal worker who might organize a rebellion if left in your home city surrounded by angry neighbors. Move you 2,000 miles away, surround you with craftsmen from a dozen other cultures, and suddenly you're too busy navigating language barriers and cultural differences to plot insurrection. It's social engineering through geographic scrambling. The scale is genuinely impressive. You're part of population movements involving tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. When the Mongols conquer Khwarezm, they relocate approximately 100,000 craftsmen and their families to Mongolia and China. That's roughly the population of a modern small city, just picked up and moved across continents. The logistics alone, feeding, housing, and transporting that many people, require organizational capacity that most medieval states couldn't manage for military campaigns, let alone civilian relocations. The genetic and cultural mixing is profound. You're a Chinese engineer working alongside a Persian mathematician, both supervised by a Mongol officer, building equipment designed by a captured European specialist. Your children might marry workers from completely different cultures because proximity creates relationships. The Mongol Empire becomes an accidental melting pot, not from ideological commitment to diversity. Remember that weaponized tolerance from Section 7, but from pure pragmatic shuffling of human resources. The administrative systems get hybridized too. You're a Persian bureaucrat who knows sophisticated tax collection methods, now working with Chinese clerks who have different accounting systems, all trying to create something that works across the whole empire. The resulting administrative framework borrows from everyone. Chinese record-keeping, Persian financial instruments, Mongol military efficiency, creating governance systems more sophisticated than what any single conquered civilization had alone. The knowledge transfer flows in all directions. Chinese paper-making technology spreads west through relocated craftsmen. Persian astronomical knowledge moves east through transplanted scholars. Medical techniques, agricultural methods, metallurgical secrets, all diffuse across the empire because the Mongols keep moving people who carry that knowledge in their heads. You're watching technology transfer happening at speeds that won't be matched until global trade networks emerge centuries later. The loyalty mechanisms are clever. You're a relocated craftsman, and the Mongols make sure you're comfortable. Decent housing, steady work, protection from banditry. Your old city might be destroyed rubble, but your new location offers stability and prosperity. After a few years, where's your loyalty? Probably to the system that's currently feeding your family, not the destroyed kingdom you barely remember. The Mongols don't just relocate people, they create conditions where relocated populations genuinely prefer their new situations. The military units get similarly mixed. You're fighting in a Tumen, 10,000 warriors, that includes Mongol cavalry, Chinese infantry, Persian engineers, and Korean archers. This diversity creates tactical flexibility, allowing combined arms operations that pure Mongol forces couldn't execute. It also prevents unit cohesion from threatening the empire. Hard to organize a rebellion when your fellow soldiers speak 6 different languages and come from mutually hostile cultures. The empire's administrative capitals, Karakorum, Khanbalik, Beijing, Tabriz, become cosmopolitan centers not through organic growth but through forced demographic engineering. You're walking through market districts where merchants from 4 continents sell goods, scholars debate in multiple languages, and craftsmen practice techniques from across the known world. It looks like sophisticated multiculturalism. It's actually the result of systematic population sorting designed to maximize imperial utility. You're standing in a workshop teaching a Mongol apprentice techniques your grandfather taught you in a city that doesn't exist anymore, preparing materials for a campaign against people who speak your native language. You're looking at a map in 12th 20th. The year Genghis Khan dies, and the Mongol Empire stretches approximately 12 million square miles. For context, that's larger than Africa. It's bigger than North and South America combined. You're watching one man's lifetime achievement, going from controlling precisely 0 square miles. Remember that abandoned kid digging up wild onions? to ruling roughly a quarter of humanity. The population under Mongol control is estimated at around 100 million people, which represents about 25% of everyone alive on Earth. Not bad for someone who started life clutching a blood clot and eating marmots to survive. The conquest speed is what makes this genuinely unprecedented. Alexander the Great needed 12 years to conquer his empire, which was impressive but covered maybe 2 million square miles. The Roman Empire took centuries to reach 5 million square miles at its peak. Genghis does 12 million in about 25 years of active campaigning. You're watching territorial acquisition happening faster than any empire before or since. The British Empire eventually got larger, but it took them 3 centuries. Genghis did it in a single human lifespan, which either says something profound about his methods or something terrifying about everyone else's incompetence. Probably both. Here's your mainstream historical fact that ties everything together. The Mongol conquest killed an estimated 11% of the global population, somewhere between 30 and 40 million people, but also created the safest trade routes in history, spread technologies across continents, and enabled cultural exchanges that wouldn't happen again until global shipping networks emerged. You're watching destruction and creation happening simultaneously, death and progress intertwined so completely they're impossible to separate. A merchant can travel from Venice to Beijing with reasonable confidence of not getting murdered by bandits, which is genuinely revolutionary for the 13th century, but that safety came at the cost of millions of corpses. Neat trick. Horrible price. The empire at Genghis's death isn't chaotic barbarian territory, it's surprisingly well administered. You're part of a system with standardized laws, the yasa, efficient taxation, religious tolerance that prevents sectarian violence, and those 10,000 yam stations keeping communication flowing. The composite bows and horse-based mobility that started everything are now supported by Chinese siege engineers, Persian administrators, and absorbed talent from dozens of conquered civilizations. Remember that felt tent from Section 1? It's been upgraded to palaces in multiple capitals, though Mongol rulers still prefer camping in gurs because old habits die hard. The systematic nature of the conquest is what makes it truly impressive, or horrifying depending on your perspective. This wasn't random destruction or impulsive expansion. Every element you've encountered over the past 9 sections, the intelligence gathering, the psychological warfare, the meritocratic promotions, the religious tolerance, the communication networks, the absorbed expertise, all of it was deliberate strategy. Genghis built a conquest machine that operated on cold efficiency rather than emotional impulse. Cities that surrendered immediately got integrated peacefully. Cities that resisted got obliterated as lessons to others. The math was always simple: cooperate and prosper or resist and die. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan was a visionary state builder or simply a talented murderer who accidentally created effective systems while pursuing conquest. The debate misses the point. He was both, and the two aspects reinforced each other. The administrative efficiency enabled more effective conquest. The conquered territories provided resources for better administration. You're watching a feedback loop where success bred more success, until the whole thing covered a quarter of the planet. Here's your quirky detail for the final section. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, possibly from injuries after falling from his horse, though sources disagree, his funeral procession killed every human they encountered along the route to prevent anyone from learning the burial location. Thousands of people died just to keep one grave secret. The conquest that started with systematic violence ended with systematic violence. His tomb has never been found, despite centuries of searching. The man who conquered 12 million square miles occupies an unknown patch of Mongolian grassland. Location lost to deliberate security measures that would impress modern intelligence agencies. The successor Khanates, eventually ruled by his sons and grandsons, will continue expanding. The empire will eventually fragment because nobody after Genghis can hold it together, proving that the system, however effective, depended on exceptional leadership at the top. But for this moment in 1227, you're looking at the largest contiguous land empire in human history, built not through superior technology or massive population, but through organizational excellence, adaptive strategy, and ruthless efficiency. The legacy is complicated, which is probably the most honest assessment. The Mongol conquest connected East and West in ways that enabled the Renaissance, spread technologies like printing and gunpowder to Europe, and created trade networks that enriched millions. They also destroyed irreplaceable centers of learning. The libraries of Baghdad alone contained centuries of scientific and literary achievements that burned in 1258. They killed enough people to temporarily reduce global carbon emissions by reforesting abandoned farmland. You're watching an empire that simultaneously advanced and destroyed human civilization, often in the same campaign. The 12 million square miles aren't empty territory. They're filled with absorbed populations, hybrid cultures, relocated craftsmen, and administrative systems that blend Chinese bureaucracy with Persian mathematics and Mongol military efficiency. Remember those mixed engineering teams from Section 5? They're now building infrastructure across the empire. Those religiously diverse communities from Section 7. They're trading peacefully under Mongol protection. Those Yam messengers from Section 8. They're coordinating governance across time zones. You're standing at the edge of the Mongol Empire in 1227, watching the sunset, metaphorically since Genghis just died, and the empire's peak unity died with him. But for this moment, you're part of the most efficient conquest machine human history produced. Not the most noble, not the most ethical, certainly not the kindest, just the most effective. 12 million square miles, a quarter of humanity, built on horses, bows, fear, intelligence, meritocracy, tolerance, communication, and absorbed talent. Built on cold, adaptive efficiency that treated conquest as an engineering problem rather than a glorious adventure. Built ultimately on the understanding that pragmatism defeats romance every single time. And now, as you drift further into sleep, let those vast distances soften into something gentler. The 12 million square miles fade into the quiet darkness behind your eyelids. The thunder of hooves becomes a distant rhythm, barely audible, like rain on a tent far away. The composite bows, the siege engines, the systematic strategies, all of it dissolves into historical memory, interesting but no longer urgent. You're no longer riding across steppes or standing in conquered cities. You're simply here, in this moment, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of your blankets, the softness of your pillow. The Mongol Empire expanded and contracted, rose and fell, shaped the world, and then faded into the long story of human civilization. All of it happened. None of it requires your attention right now. The felt tents have folded away. The Yam messengers have completed their routes. The engineers have finished their calculations. Genghis Khan rests in his hidden grave. Location still unknown. Story finally complete. And you rest too, letting the narrative settle like dust after a long journey, particles finding their places in the stillness. History continues its slow unfold whether we watch or not. Empires rise and empires fall. Conquerors conquer and then become memories, and all of it eventually becomes just stories we tell each other before sleep. Stories about horses and bows and 12 million square miles, about pragmatism and efficiency, and the strange ways humans organize themselves across landscapes and centuries. But tonight, the story is finished. The lights are dim. The fan hums its gentle background note. Your breathing has slowed to something deep and regular. The Mongol Horde has ridden beyond the horizon, leaving you here in peaceful darkness, ready for whatever dreams might come, or for the simple, silent rest that needs no dreams at all. Sleep well. The Empire can wait until morning, or perhaps forever. Either way, you're done for tonight.